So Inside Out 2 is the sequel to Pixar's Inside Out, all about the inner thoughts and emotions of the tween Riley. Well, she was a tween in the first film, now in Inside Out 2, she's a teenager. So more complex emotions come with puberty for the sequel. And in terms of returning to this type of story and this setting with this type of character, I feel like Inside Out 2 finds just enough to explore with like this character development and her internal struggles to warrant to warrant like a further examination and a sequel for Riley, because in essence I think like the sequel more or less goes about the same motions as the first film, because it's a similar lesson, because it's once again Riley's inner emotion of joy, once again voiced by Amy Poehler. She needs to learn a hard lesson. She needs to learn that, with puberty coming and like these new emotions that come into the mix, like we should probably run down like the new emotions that come here. There's anxiety, voiced by Maya Hawke. There's what else we have? We have envy, voiced by Ayoa Dibri. We have what else? We have ennui, voiced by Adele Exarchopoulos. I'm gonna screw this up. Adele Exarchopoulos. I believe I'm pronouncing that. I probably butchered that, but she plays ennui or boredom. And then, of course, you have embarrassment, voiced by Paul Walter Hauser, although kind of more like Groot. Like, don't expect Hauser to have a lot of lines in this. So it's Joy learning to work with these new emotions. It's basically Joy going on the same type of journey. She has to realize that she can't micromanage everything. She can't keep up Joy, and she's got to learn to share the emotional console with anxiety. And if that were all that the film was, it would be a fairly standard sequel that didn't feel like it was exploring much and was kind of vanilla. But thankfully, I like the idea how they expand on Riley with a new system they install, which is installing a core belief system, where all those like little all those like those memory balls that like kind of like that basically clutter all the shelves of Riley, those all the key ones get implemented into her core, basically like her core beliefs. So everything that she believes about herself, her identity, and more or less her self-esteem is established by that. And Joy feels like she can control that. So she takes like the bad memories and launches them into the distance, and takes the good ones to form Riley's core belief of like, empowerment and feeling better about herself. And of course, we all know where this is going. Joy has realized she can't do that, and that she tries to micromanage, it's going to lead to some darker places, and that happens when anxiety basically takes the wheel. So it's a more or less the same type of story as Inside Out, the first one, but it's more interesting, I think, that Joy has to set an example rather than Joy just learning the hard lesson that you can't just shove everything into the background, especially when it comes to something big like forming core beliefs. It's an understandable reaction, because like more or less, if you look at like the different emotions here, like everything from like, joy to, disgust, fear, anger, sadness, they're all mostly operating on like the same level as like a parent wanting to like micromanage and do what's best for their child. So I think having, Joy have to realize to set a better example leans into more of the parental angle, and I think that mostly works. But like, what is a bit of a disappointment is that a lot of what happens after that, where Joy gets basically launched back out into the wasteland of Riley's like changing psyche within her mind, it's mostly another adventure, except it feels like roles have been kind of swapped here. Because in this adventure, it's not just joy and sadness. Because now sadness is left behind to try to stop anxiety, while joy, fear, disgust, and anger all go to kind of like retrieve this core belief of Riley that has been tossed far, far, far into the background. And I think like, and because like the thing is like, I understand why they do this, like, because it does mix it up a bit. It does give Joy more of a chance to interact with these other characters. I did find it kind of interesting how, like, in the first draft of Inside Out, it was supposed to be joy and fear going on this adventure. So I like that it explores more of these characters who didn't get as much time while still finding, like, a good usage for them. The thing is, I wish there were more interesting angles to explore within Riley's developing mind. Like we do go to a few interesting areas. Like I love how there's this kind of like repressed memory prison where Riley tries to hide that she liked old cartoons or like a crush on a video game character. But if you're expecting anything akin to like what happened with the imaginary character of Bing Bong in the last film, you won't really get that here. It's more, they more or less treat it as just like a brief like pit stop and there are a lot of those on the adventure to kind of retrieve Riley's core beliefs, and everything else, it just kind of feels like a reiterance of what happened in the first Inside Out film, but with like a different coat of paint. So in other words, like Riley's imagination is now, you know, based on possibilities more than dreaming up different ideas and, you know, using your creativity for something else. And it's like I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff to explore in that changing mind, because like we get to see how the central console for the emotion is reworked for puberty. And there is some of that going on in the rest of Riley's mind. I just wish there was more of that, and that I didn't feel like just like, you know, little stops along the way. Like there were very few moments where it felt like there was something holding them back that they had to get through and kind of like manipulate Riley's mind to progress further. There are some moments with it, like in particular, there's the scene where they have to kind of hijack Riley's emotions during her dream state, which is kind of good. I mean, there's a fairly funny bit in there. Like there's a little bit of a parody of like the 1984 Apple ad, which I don't know how many I can, like, Gen Xers are probably gonna really love that one, I guess, but yeah, like there's like just enough fun ideas, I think, within there, and there's enough time to explore these emotions, I think, where I think that really works. And yeah, I was kind of going along with the film mostly. It's like, okay, you know, having all this being set at a hockey camp with like Riley trying to define herself, I think that works. And it's like, okay, this is working, you know, and like what the emotions have to go through. Okay, this is kind of cool. Anxiety taking over too much control and not thinking that too far ahead. Okay, I see where this is going. I like where the wheels are turning. So I'm just kind of going with it. Like it's not really impressing. It wasn't impressing me as much as the first Inside Out film. But then once it got to the finale, I think it really kicked into high gear and actually made me love it a little bit more. Just because like there's that moment of realization where, you know, both like Riley and all the emotions need to realize that her core beliefs have to, like, you know, it takes all those thoughts and all those emotions to kind of better define yourself and face that level of like humility and realize, you know, like it takes all that, you know, you can't just embrace one thing, and you have to learn to manage your emotions. And again, this is all telegraphed. It all lets you know where this is going and where it's going to head. But once they get to that moment where all the emotions kind of like combine, and, you know, like they're all present for Riley's like darker thoughts of like hating herself and being embarrassed and not feeling that, you know, that she belongs or that she can maintain friendships or that she's going to be a good person. It really got to me. I got like surprisingly a little bit choked up at that finale. And that honestly kind of made up for the fact that immediately following that scene, there's a moment where it's almost kind of like they give Riley a break in her own reality. Like they come to like a simpler resolve, I think, than the first Inside Out film. Like the first Inside Out film, it ended in a way that would be believable, where you don't have to say much and, you know, like your family will be there. In this film, it's more about friendship, and I feel like you know, maybe this is just my mindset, but like the way that like her friends kind of like come to her and kind of like recognize, you know, when she's, you know, feeling like the anxiety and that there's pressure on her and they're not quite sure how to react. They kind of get like this, like, you know, almost kind of like, I don't quite want to say like an after school type vibe, but they do have a way where it kind of like wraps things up a little bit too sentimentally easy, I would think. Because, like, I don't know, maybe it's just like my different mindset on, how teenagers like this would react to these kind of like dividing lines and trying to better define themselves and recognizing when someone is going through a tough time. But the thing is, like, I think at that point in the film, I was almost kind of willing to forgive it because, after everything that Riley goes through, she could use a break. And the film does end on a very, very strong moral message about learning to control your anxiety by not pushing it down, but recognizing what you can control. So it still has a lot of the good stuff that made the first Inside Out film great. It's just that it doesn't quite have the same level of ingenuity and freshness to make it as impactful, I think, as the first film. It's still good, and it still has, I think it explores just enough material here. I like the way the characters are framed. There's some fairly funny moments. I love the mental landscape of Riley is still fun to explore. It's just that it feels like it explores just enough of that material where it feels like review from what the first one, like, it's like, here's all the lessons from the first film, and we're applying it, into being a teenager. Which I think for some adults, like, they're gonna, like, myself included, I look at this more as like a review of what the first film did. Like, okay, here's like just applying the lessons again. But I think for like the younger audience, like, because I mean, the last Inside Out film was like 9 years ago, so few kids will probably remember that. So being able to see this film, all about trying to manage more of that part of yourself that you don't feel you can control, I think is a really important message for kids. And I think it's explored just enough in this film where I think it's a worthy sequel. It's not like a great sequel, but it's not on the level of, Pixar's previous sequels where it felt like there wasn't a lot more to explore here. There's just enough to explore within Inside Out 2 that I think it's a worthy sequel, and I think a lot of kids who watch it are gonna come away with a fairly good message, and I hope they're entertained. But I think for some tweens it might be a little too real, just for like the anxieties that Riley goes through and the embarrassment and the envy that she feels. But you know what, I think those kids need something hard, something that they can recognize and that isn't afraid to approach these topics head on. So yeah, I think it's a worthy sequel, and I think for the younger audience, I think it's far more beneficial. So yeah, Inside Out 2 is a pretty good sequel.